Well, I want to welcome Congressman Bob Latta joining us at the INCOMPAS Policy Summit. He was with us last year, and now this year we're greatly appreciative of his views, his work, and his thoughts and leadership on the Energy and Commerce Committee, the ranking member, the Republican leader on the Subcommittee for Communications and Technology, also chairs the rural, or co-chairs, the Rural Broadband Caucus, and just provides tremendous bipartisan leadership for rural America and the priorities of connecting every community, every small town, school, library, hospital, small business in those areas of the country to the very needed and essential services of broadband. But he serves his constituents well in the 5th District of Ohio, serving both on the Communications and Technology Subcommittee, but also on the Energy Subcommittee. And he's really been a great advocate for his district, his state, and the economic growth and the consumer benefits of both the communications, broadband, and the energy sectors. So, Congressman, it is great to have you back with us. We have gone through a lot this year as a country with COVID and pandemic and a number of challenges across all fronts. I know that you love the institution of Congress. Your father served. You have a great record of public service. What would you say the lessons that you've learned during the pandemic and COVID since we last talked, and how does broadband and your priorities of trying to connect everyone in Ohio to high speed, high capacity networks of the future, what would you say the lessons have been through this past year?
Well, Chip, thanks very much for having me on, and everyone at INCOMPAS, thanks very much. Really appreciate it. And, just talking about energy and commerce, I could just for one brief second, the great thing about energy and commerce is, and I told people, especially when you're talking about the technology subcommittee, it's so important that, because one of the things I've always said, when you sit up on that dais and you're talking and you see these people coming before us, those are the innovators, the entrepreneurs. We're looking over the horizon 5 to 10 years. And it's so important that we make sure we get the legislation right. And then when those regulations come in. But it really came in, I think, into play what we saw happen during the pandemic. I think that what we had in place had us in a much better position than so many countries around the world. When I think about initially when it started, and first of all, what we're doing today, we were on a Zoom. I remember I was on a webinar with, 200 or 300 different people from around the country, but somebody asked a really important question at the very end. He said, do you think we're ever going to get back to normal? And I said, well, I guess my question to you is what's normal? Because here we are, no one left their homes, their cities, they didn't travel, and they got out by being able to be on this. But this is what we were able to accomplish. But I think it's important in several aspects of what we were able to get done. Number one of the things I was at in my district with one of my health commissioners this morning was talking about healthcare. But just think about telehealth. If we didn't have the telehealth facility that we had because of what we were able to have with our broadband across this country and people being able to connect, doctors would have been overwhelmed at emergency rooms. So that was one of the big things right off the bat. And I had so many doctors tell me they never thought it would work. Within 2 to 3 weeks, they were all singing its praises. Then you look on the education side, not only for the K through 12, but for all the kids that, they couldn't get to school. And so this, kept them learning during this horrible time. And then kids, students on our university levels, the same thing for them. So from the business end to the school to the healthcare, I think that what we saw happen was that we had a system that did not fail. And a large part of that was because of the infrastructure that the private sector had put in over all these years, that $1.7 trillion plus that really kept us going during this time frame.
Well, I'm so proud of our member companies. We were the first to take the Keep America Connected pledge that Chairman Pai asked all of the broadband industry to do. And so the competitive builders and providers really stepped up, and the redundancy and the resilience of our networks that could keep the service going during the pandemic keep the schools, the hospitals, the healthcare, our small businesses up and running and operating during this time. Where would we have been without broadband, the connectivity? And also, I want to thank you for your leadership in the COVID legislation, the CARES legislation, for really giving the resources our companies needed to keep their services and keep their communities and their customers connected. So thank you for that. And I wanted to now, as we go from last year to the new year, what do you see in legislation that could come out of the Congress in the early days of a new Congress on infrastructure and on broadband? Any predictions or thoughts?
Well, again, if I could just back up for one thing, I think it was important what you just said is what was done. You know, one of the things that we were able to get done too was on our broadband mapping out there. It was absolutely so important, and we get the funding in there to make sure that it gets done and gets done right. But when you look into the future right now, I think we still have a lot of issues, especially when we look at our rural areas, because we want to make sure that the connectivity is there. I look at my district and, you know, there's a lot of areas that still don't have access, and we want to make sure it gets there. So I think that, you know, the top is we really have to look at our unserved areas across the areas. I know that when we always have to be careful when we say unserved and underserved, but we want to make sure we get those unserved areas, because when you have nothing to begin with, it's tough. And so we want to make sure that we get these areas served and make sure that these people can get connected, because again, from everything, as I mentioned a little earlier, from healthcare to education to business, if you don't have it today, you're not going anywhere. And so it's important. So I think one of the things we really have to do is make sure that we get that connectivity out there, that the broadband is there. But at the same time, the question is we're going to need more spectrum. And so it's like, how are we going to be running these spectrum auctions? How are we going to make sure that these, you know, it's divvied up? You know, that's another issue out there is how we pay, you know, we're going to pay for it. And I think we can, my legislation in the last Congress that we can bring forward again that can help do that. But I think it's going to be important that we do. And there's certain areas that with the federal government, that there's spectrum there that's not being used that we need to get at. And we don't want to put anything at jeopardy, but it's important for us to be able to have that spectrum. So I think those are a couple of the top things right off the bat. And of course, winning the race to 5G.
Well, I want to thank you on your leadership on the Wireless Leadership Act, which you introduced and led last year. And we're very glad to hear that you'll be reintroducing this year. How do we get more spectrum out into the marketplace? We've had a great, historic, successful C-band auction that just completed. CBRS, where we have the new technologies that allow spectrum sharing that can be very efficient and effective, and how we do that to free up more spectrum, share with government users and multiple commercial users. So your leadership on spectrum and how important that is to winning the race to 5G, especially as we enter into a new rivalry with China. So we're very grateful for your leadership on that. On the infrastructure bill, we have Jim Clyburn and Jerry Moran, bipartisan, bicameral leaders that are joining the policy summit discussion tomorrow. But we do hope that our member companies can work with you and members on both sides of the aisle to try to achieve a new national commitment or consensus on broadband to everyone. Much like the country did coming out of the Depression, saying that electricity now is essential and needs to be to every home, every business. We hope to achieve that same objective on broadband, and your leadership with the Rural Caucus on wireless. All of those inputs are very critical. Any other thoughts on what we can do to have other legislative priorities that would support those objectives?
Well, you know, first of all, as I said, it's really great to be on with all of your members. Yeah, because again, it's really important that we hear from you. And you know how it is. The best ideas that we come up with are the ideas that we hear from people in our own districts. And it's so important that we hear from the membership out there, because again, This is not a top down. This is what I believe is a bottom up type of a deal where we're hearing from the people in our districts. And that's how we build to get to what we have to have. You're absolutely right. Is going back to, on electricity, and we want to make sure, back in the 1930s when that came through, I know my mom was 12 on the farm before they had electricity. And so it was one of those things, when you don't have something, it's important when you get it. But I think it's important, as I said, though, it's really important that membership reaches out to their members, even if they don't serve on energy and commerce, or it's because, again, this is something that affects everyone in the community, not just one group, everybody. So we want to make sure that we hear from everybody. And it's tough right now that, you can't walk the halls of Congress with COVID, but that doesn't mean you can't pick up the phone, you can't do Zooms. But it's important that we just keep hearing from the people back home.
Well, and one of the areas that we hear from our member companies is how can they more effectively cooperate, collaborate with localities, cities, mayors, boards of supervisors to streamline the deployment of next generation networks and technologies. Any thoughts on that front?
Well, and again,
how we can give the resources
right
to incentivize both sides of the relationship to speed the deployment.
Well, and I come from an interesting background because my first 6 years of public service, I was a county commissioner. And I know that I have 14 counties. That means we have 3 commissioners in each county. But I know that in some of my counties, one in particular, one of the commissioners is highly involved in wanting to make sure that they get deployment across the county in 5G. In fact, I had Commissioner Carr in the district late last fall in that county, and that's one of the great things that with our past commissioners and chairman, they're willing to get out there, and I think that people are kind of shocked when I bring out an FCC commissioner or the chairman of the FCC to their backyard, and then they say, well, we didn't know they were accessible, and I said, no, they want to be out there to hear it. So I think it's connecting, Washington with our local governments is so important. Because again, I can't tell you how many times I've been in different meetings where they said, different people I've had out, that they hadn't considered something that they hear back in the what I call the real world, where this has got to work. And that's why they got to hear from the people firsthand. With the bills that we had in committee last year that you brought up, we had about 26 different pieces of legislation on our side, but we want this to be seamless. We want to make it easy, and we can do it really without spending very much money, if any money at all, but it's just making sure that we're working with all levels of government to make sure that we can go forward that way to get that spectrum out there.
Yeah, so many of our member companies, they say, we don't need a subsidy, we don't need funding, but we do need you to remove the barriers. Streamline, let us build our networks, and they use private capital to deploy the networks that are so desperately needed right now and critical not only to the health and well-being, but to the economic recovery coming out of the pandemic. So I hope that those efforts can be part of any legislation, and we want to engage with you and other key members to make sure that we find a win-win for localities and our companies who are building the new networks and trying to connect their communities. So we will take you up and continue to work with you on that front.
Thank you.
One thing we also are hearing from our member companies is that with the latest round of RDOF, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, a lot of promises were made and by a lot of the entrants that received those funding. But some concerns, will they actually deliver what was promised? What is the accountability and the reviews that are necessary to make sure that everyone who won, or every company that won funding in RDOF in the last round actually deliver on that promise? And any thoughts on the oversight, the accountability role for the House and the Energy and Commerce Committee?
Yeah, I think it's two-pronged. You're absolutely correct when it comes right down to, because we have our oversight, that's our obligation. that we want to make, when you see these dollars going out, you want to make sure they're being wisely used. So that's one of the main things that that's our obligation, is to make sure that we do have that oversight. At the same time, you want to make sure that the FCC and the NTIA, that they're doing their job on oversight at the same. So it's as I said, it's two-pronged. Because again, those are federal dollars that go out, and we want to make sure that those federal dollars are used wisely. So that's one of the things I see, and I know that on our side, as we talked in Energy and Commerce earlier this year, all of our members on the committee, that how much oversight that we need to be doing. But again, we as a Republican in the minority, we're not the ones calling them. But it's important for us to make sure that we have those hearings, and to make sure that when they are there, that we're asking the absolute most important questions. A lot of times, again, when we have oversight hearings, it's good to hear from people back home when they know that we're having these hearings, for them to be able to bring up certain ideas or questions, or things that we might not have thought about looking at it from the Washington perspective. So we want to hear from the people back home as we do these hearings.
As we come out of COVID and the CARES legislation, RDOF, expansions and modernizations of the E-rate program, telehealth, and the possibility of a major component of broadband funding in the infrastructure bill, we'll probably see more federal funding than any time in yours in my lifetime combined, directed at broadband. And so the oversight and accountability of how those funds are used, and do they actually deliver on the promise of the speed, the capacity, and reaching everyone, I think is going to be a very important component of your work on the committee. And so we appreciate your commitment to good oversight, good accountability, good transparency of where the funds go, and that everybody lives up to the promises that they've made. One thing that INCOMPAS has been advocating and urging, and we're very thankful that Chairman Pai weighted the RDOF toward higher speeds, toward 1 gig. And we want to continue to work with you to make sure that we lift our standards, and we lift our vision of how fast we can deliver both broadband, or at the speed that broadband can be delivered. The administration has been talking about a national spectrum strategy in the early days. You've been a leader on spectrum policy. Any thoughts on the ways that the congressional leadership and the administration can work together to have a national strategy, as well as how that strategy can help us win the race to 5G in relation to China?
Well, I think it's important because, when you're talking about rural broadband, or broadband in general, a lot of this is not a Republican, Democrat, or independent issue. It is a truly bipartisan issue. When I look back at all the Democrats that I've worked with on the committee or the subcommittee, that it's not that we stake out some kind of a political thing, because it's just like, hey, our districts are very similar in a lot of ours, and we got to get it out there. So I think with the administration, they've got to really look at a bipartisan and sitting down with everyone. And when I mean everyone, I mean us. Recently, unfortunately, it's been pretty much a one-way street, that they haven't really been bringing Republicans into a lot of discussions. But in this case, when you look across the United States, especially the areas that don't have broadband right now, a lot of Republican areas, and we want to make sure that we're all working together to get to that point. Yeah, because again, as I said, it isn't a partisan issue; it is a bipartisan issue. And as I've talked with people from around the country and listened to them and their needs, it's just like, it's exactly like what is in Northwest, West Central Ohio. So we just need to work together on this to get it done. And it's sometimes it's like you start thinking, how hard is this? It should be a pretty simple thing that we could get done. But we all have to sit down and know what, get some things on the page and get it done. Ronald Reagan once said multiple times, I should say, that he'd rather get 80% of something than go off the cliff with all flags flying. And he also said, if you're with me 85% of the time, for my friend. And I think those words from Reagan are very, very useful in today's day and age.
Well, our next interview is with Commissioner Carr, and he has been a great champion on the deployment agenda and working with you on spectrum policy. Our members commit to you to work on a bipartisan basis to help you achieve your vision of your district and rural America being served with the best networks and broadband possible. We're grateful for your leadership, your love for the Congress and the Constitution, and look forward to working with you for the rest of this Congress.
Well, thank you very much. When the commissioner is on, tell him I appreciate the 2 times that he's been out. He did some climbing. I got some good pictures of him way up in the air. But I was on the ground. But Commissioner Carr is a great individual to have at the FCC to get these things done. And again, he's out listening to people to take those things back to Washington. And so tell him I appreciate his couple of trips to my district.
Well, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
And being available and accessible to all of our member companies. And we'll be coming to see you as soon as COVID lifts.
Absolutely.
And we look forward to helping connect all of Americans to broadband.
Well, thanks very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.